You've been in business for a year now.
About a year and a half.
How long have you had the mill?
About 2 years.
2 years.
Yeah, I picked up the mill because I knew I wanted to start making ink, but before I started marketing it, I had to have the mill and do formulations and stuff like that.
What's a, okay, tell us about the parts. I mean, your idea is to make etching inks and litho inks. And you got three rollers there. You got water pipes coming. What's
this machine's used for grinding all kinds of pigments. It's used in paint making, ink making. Those are the primary things. But in each one of those categories, there's a lot of materials. There's also other ways of grinding pigments, but this is probably the best because it keeps the temperatures at the lowest, keeps the pigment in the oils or whatever the medium is at the lowest temperature.
There used to be a lot of emphasis on hand grinding with the muller. Would you say this is better?
Yeah, it's better for one reason. In hand mulling, according to Ralph Mayer, the Artist Handbook, dispersions which are hand milled usually contain about 40% more oil because they can't as effectively wet the pigment as this mill can. A lot of people would say that a lot of people are willing to the mystique of hand grinding, but it's not as good as this mill right here does. A lot of commercial grinders, ink makers and paint makers use other methods, so I would think that probably hand milling in that case would make a better dispersion. But I think what I make here is the best possible dispersion.
You got set up before we came. You said something about you mixed up some.
Yeah, I'm gonna make an etching ink today. This a combination of bone vine and Frankfurt black, which are some of the organic pigments made from organic sources.
Is that the Dan Smith organic black?
Yeah, it's number 53.
Number 53.
There's also other kinds of pigments like carbon black and lamp black and drop black and different things like that. But for Intaglio inks, this formula is a real historical formula. These materials have been around for, I don't know, 6 or 7 centuries probably, or maybe, I don't know, maybe the Egyptians used them, I don't know, maybe the Chinese used them, but it's a real old-timey formula, and this is a pretty old-timey mill. It's about probably 30, 40 years old, so.
Well, you said that you mixed it up before we came because it's real dirty.
Yeah, it's real,
so, I mean,
a lot of dispersion.
What would that look like if you had to do that now, about what's involved, so when you show the whole process go through.
Okay, the whole point of making ink or paint or anything like this is to suspend a pigment in a medium that dries. Traditionally, we use linseed oils, and in ink making, we use linseed oils that have been bodied. Linseed is an agricultural product. It's grown all over the world, and it varies from hemisphere to hemisphere. Like the best linseed oils in the world come from Russia, the Balkan linseed oils. And then the next best linseed oils generally come from the United States, but the stuff's grown in Argentina, it's grown in Africa, it's grown all over the world.
Does that come from, is that associated with flax?
Yeah, it's the same.
That's
it's the same
seed
creature.
Of the flax.
But the flax that the flax they grow for making linen is a different creature than what they make linseed oil out of. And then
different strain, you mean?
Well, it's probably the same family, but it's probably like collies and German shepherds. They breed them for different purposes.
Yeah, you sell paper too, which is primarily made of linen.
And
so you're pretty heavily dependent on the flax and linseed.
I'm pretty heavily dependent upon agriculture and the petroleum industry, and that's not a real comfortable position to be in. But we're all dependent on it.
Where's the petroleum come in?
Well, it comes in the carbon blacks, which I
see.
use in litho ink, and lamp black, which I use in relief ink, and a little bit in Intaglio ink.
Okay, so in these drums you've got powdered pigment. And so you have to come in, you have to weigh that pigment out, and you weigh out so much oil. And that's when the dust flies, right?
Well, in the weighing out process, it's not too bad, but I have a mixer over here, sort of a little mixer, and when you mix it, it gets a little nasty.
Is that just like whipping it up?
It's like a mix
blender
master.
Or something?
Yeah, all it does is just disperse the pigment through the oil.
Okay, and that's what you've got waiting to
right here in this bucket.
Okay.
Yeah, I got about 22 pounds of dispersion.
Well, let's see what it does.
Let's see, here's that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What I'm going to do here is wet. The point of this mill is to wet every pigment particle with oil. when it comes off the mixer, it's not wetted. And there's different ways of wetting, which I'll get into in a while with that diagram. But I'll just run some pigment through some ink through the mill here, and it'll probably take about 5 or 6 grinds to get this, so it's really nice. This is water cooled. These 2 rollers here have water jackets in them and help to keep the heat level down. This is what's called a low-speed mill. Commercially now they use high-speed mills where the stuff's just flying through there, like for commercial litho inks and stuff like that. This mill really doesn't have a whole lot of commercial value. You know,
It's too slow.
yeah, you know, it's too slow. It's way too slow for S&V or whoever, some big ink maker here in town. On this mill, the way I work, I could probably make about, depending on the ink, between 150 and 300 pounds a day. A large ink maker in Chicago who makes Intaglio ink told me in 1971 that he makes 60,000 pounds in August and 60,000 pounds in September of black etching ink. And so obviously his capacity is much higher than mine. But I don't think he uses a 3-roll mill, I'm not sure. The first time through the mill, this dispersion, I'm not really trying to grind it, I'm just trying to mix it more thoroughly. This happens to be a real heavy ink.
And this is a 53, right?
Yeah.
I'll remember that next time I use some 53.
I'll give you a can today and you can
That's beautiful, the way that black thing lays up there.
It's really beautiful ink. It's not real black because organic pigments aren't real black. This is sort of your traditional University of Iowa ink. It's not exactly the same formula. Every formula I get from there, though, is different. I get letters from people saying, when I was a student at Iowa, our ink was so black, and et cetera, et cetera. And I say, send me the formula, and everybody sends me a different one. So I don't. Actually, this formula I got out of a real old ink making book, and like printmakers, ink makers who make ink for artists now have to continually adapt materials because living in a space age, nothing is the way it was. So you always have to look for substitutions, or it takes a little bit of research sometimes. That front roll isn't set very tight. As soon as I set it, it'll come zooming through there, but I want to get all this stuff out of the can first.
You said you made about 22 pounds of that mixture?
Yeah, this is only 20. Ordinarily, if we were videotaping, I'd probably be making about double batch. I'd be running one batch through while the other one's, sitting here. It's really not economical to make this small amount.
About how many pounds? Well, does that work out to be so many pounds of dry pigment?
Right.
And how do you measure your oil? By
weight.
By weight?
Uh-huh.
So what's the ratio?
The ratio roughly would be probably about 65% pigment and 35% oil on this particular ink. On litho ink, where we use carbon blacks, the ratio is about 35 to 40% pigment, 60 to 65% oil. And that really has a lot to do with determining the nature of the ink. When you're making Intaglio ink, you're almost making like a casting material, where when you're making relief and litho ink, you're making a material to create a film. I really like making Intaglio inks in a way because they're in a sense more sculptural. I mean, you're making like you know, something that's going to really be an object.
Yeah,
and,
it's like it's performing two
Pardon me?
functions instead of just a printing function.
Right, yeah. Plus, they're, you know, I don't know, it's more fun to make.
Are you tightening the roller now?
Yeah, I'm not really doing much grinding here. This is just sort of to disperse the stuff all through. I'm sort of hoping on a small batch I don't have to catch it in that pail, but maybe I will. Just because it's a drag to dig it out. Sometimes if I make a small enough batch, it'll hang here on the apron, I can just put it back through again. On the modern space age mills, they have all hydraulic settings, and this is what's called a 24-inch by 8-inch mill, which is the size of the roll. And commercially, they go up to like 16 by 52. You know, that is incredible. You know, the potential to increase my capacity is there. I could probably make you know, 2,000–3,000 pounds a day. You know, it'd be no big deal.
And then they have tiny lab mills, right?
Yeah.
Like 8 inches wide and 2 inch.
Even 6 inches.
6 inch.
They're not very efficient because they heat up so fast.
They're not cooled, in other words.
No. Well, you can get little bigger ones that are cooled, like 4-inch by 8-inch. But you know, every ink chemist uses them all the time to do little sample batches. It's sort of absurd when I test new inks. You know, I got this great big mill and I got little 2-ounce batches going on it, you know? But it does an accurate thing. So the heavier the ink, the harder it is to grind it. And this stuff appears to be a little bit soft, but you know, once it's in a can, and you know, it stiffens up quite a bit.
I don't know. I don't think I'd ever get tired of watching that stuff coming off the apron like that. That's beautiful.
I know it. One thing that I'm real into is the nature of each pigment. The nature of each pigment determines the nature of the ink. And sort of one of the things that ink makers and paint makers have done the last few, well, maybe the last 25 or 30 years is they've adapted all the pigment and modifiers in the mediums, so that like yellow paints or prints exactly like red, and red paints or prints exactly like blue. And I think that's really affected the work. I don't think artists have any real idea about their material in terms of pigment. Like I think the reason that color field painters paint the way they do is that they treat green and red and blue and yellow exactly alike. Where like someone who, you know, like an artist from the Renaissance, you know, knew that ultramarine blue was very long and stringy pigment, and consequently he painted with it in a way that would, I think that those materials controlled the work a lot. And I think now that everyone just takes color for granted, and color is a very interesting thing. I mean, you know, like blue isn't just blue. Blue is a substance that reads blue and happens to be adapted to a medium. I mean, for example, the pigments which work in Intaglio inks very seldom work in litho inks. You need like a bulky pigment, like the earth pigments make horrible litho inks. You know, like I've got a can of, I don't know, I think raw sienna in the other room there, and it's just like, it's so gritty, it's horrible litho ink. But you know, makes splendid Intaglio ink. So
again, it's like talking about an ink as a casting medium.
Yeah.
As a
versus a film.
Film.
And then there's like, you know, like you talk about earth colors, you know, like the umbras and the siennas and the ochre and stuff like that. I don't think there's a paint maker or an ink maker in the world that uses real umber or sienna or ochre. It's all synthetic. It's all made from synthetic iron oxide, which is in a sense a better pigment. But the ultimate color, you know, is uniform, and it's really pretty boring. But I bet that, you know, if in fact if and when I get into making earth colors, I'm going to be using that stuff too, because it's what's available. You know?
It sounds a lot like glaze formulations for ceramics.
It probably is. Stuff's all probably, you know, real related.
Well, although, you know, the ceramic artists are still working with the natural materials, at least in the hand-built ceramics.
Don't want to forget to put down your catch pail, or else it's a little messy. Okay, this grind, I'm going to put a little bit more squeeze on it. The back two rollers don't really do any grinding. They're just a hopper, which determines how much ink you let you grind through the first two rolls. I think I got too much pressure. On these heavy dispersions, it really does work the mill pretty hard. There. And a common misnomer is that you grind the pigment. You don't really grind the pigment. You just wet it. In the old days, when pigment was not well refined, you probably actually did some grinding, actually breaking down the pigment. But God, the pigment industry has got this thing down, so they're making pigments that's so fine, it's incredible. Commercial ink makers almost never use dry pigment. They work from what's known as dispersions or flush colors, where they buy vats of concentrated pigment and mediums. Like, for example, I use burnt linseed oil, which is still used some in the ink industry, but they're real into using linseed oils with resins cooked in them and stuff like that. The whole point of ink making commercially is speed and economics and time. Like, they got to make inks that will go on offset presses that run 10 or 15,000 impressions an hour, and so it doesn't fly all over, you know. And then they want it so it dries immediately, and you know, when you talk to people in the industry about stuff like this, they think you're nuts. You know, it's just the same thing you get when you go down to your local litho house and tell them you want plate cleaner or something, you know.
Or talk about stones.
Yeah, it's the same kind of trip. And I mean, I presume that in the market of ink making, this probably doesn't constitute 1% of 1%, but. So it's just a matter of adapting and, you know, working it out with the suppliers.
You never make color.
All I make right now is blue, and the reason that's all I make is because of my environment here. You know. Also, the economics. Economics of color is real expensive. If I made like cadmium red or cadmium yellow, like the raw pigment runs about $15 a pound, and I got to buy 100 pounds, so that's $1,500 just for the raw pigment for one ink. And you know, like the blacks are a lot less expensive than that, and also everybody uses more black than anything else. So maybe someday, if I ever get to a point where I can afford it or I want to or something, I might do that. I don't know.
Is this ink going to get softer the more times it's ground, or heavier, or stiffer?
It should stay about the same. It'll just get more consistent. You can see It's getting pretty.
It's smoother now.
Yeah, there's a little stuff in there. It'll just keep getting more and more even. It's actually probably pretty much ground right now, but commercially everything's 2 grinds.
And you're going to go 6?
I'll probably go 5 or 6 on this ink because it's such a heavy body. If I was going on a lighter ink, I'd probably go 4. There's a lot of tricks to this stuff. One thing I'm into is making permanent materials. Not because I think artists ought to use permanent materials. That's not my business to know that, but just that I think that the people who make art materials should do that as a prerequisite. You know, make permanent things. But I've learned a lot of stuff, a lot of tricks that make the ink easier to work with, but also limits the permanence. The French, I'm told, sort of through a good source, someone who made ink in France, he told me that they grind soap into their ink.
I heard about that too.
Yeah.
Somebody was here a few years ago, and they worked in Switzerland. And they talked about soap in the ink. And I couldn't believe it. What would be the point of that?
I think it just makes the, see, they'd use lamp black, which is a real greasy pigment. It would be real hard to wipe, but it was incredibly black. So if you grind soap in it, my hunch is it would wipe a lot better. And if you got ink on your hands and you want to get it off, use soap. You know, I think probably somebody figured it out one day, you know. But I think there's something that's real bad about that. I don't think the ink will ever dry. And I think that in 25 years, those prints will be stained. I don't know that for sure. I just think that's true. I'm also real skeptical of wax compounds, like Easy Wipe. I think maybe used in 1 or 2% total volume, it's okay. But I think if it's used a lot, I'm skeptical.
It's a wax?
I think that's what it is. I'm almost sure it's what it is.
Is there a difference? I felt like when I use a Lefranc or a Charbonnel, that they respond to heat differently than what I call the American-made inks. Is that accurate?
God, I don't know. I don't know why it would be.
It seemed like American inks, you could wipe them whether it was cold or hot, but the European inks had to be hot on the plate, Intaglio inks.
Might be to use heavier oils. I think my inks work better when they're wiped hot.
When they're warm?
Yeah, warm, yeah. But maybe it's just the style of printing, I don't know. I think that the stiffer oils would soften up.
Maybe it's too because a lot of American inks, maybe they've been modified with Easy Wipe or waxes or soaps or something like that, especially what they call a student grade inks. So they're guaranteed to work whether you do it cold or hot. You know?
Brett, that's something I just don't know.
You're not going to put anything in this ink except pigment and
it's just pigment and oil. Yeah. I use different weight oils. Oils are real interesting. The way they body linseed oil is by heat, and there's different ways. Well, I should probably start at the beginning. You go out in the field and they get the flaxseed, and take it to the local elevator, and you know, like the linseed oil people come by and buy this stuff, like buying beans or anything else, and they press the seed. Now, there's a lot of talk about cold pressed oil in the art thing, you know, but to my knowledge, there's no cold pressed linseed oil outside of the Soviet Union, and they eat it there. I mean, it's a food, you know. They put it on salads and stuff, and so there again, you know, like maybe in 100 years ago, you could buy cold pressed oil all day because they didn't know how to hot press oil, you know. But you get about double the production out of it, or double the amount of oil out of a seed if you hot press it versus cold pressing it. And you know, the artist material market isn't big enough that anybody's willing to cold press oil for you. Plus, I'm not sure that that you could really make a case for it being that much better, you know, for the economics involved. But then they take this oil and they let it sit, and this junk falls out of it, which are called foots, which is the impurities in the oil. And then they put it in big kettles, big copper kettles or stainless steel kettles, and they body the oil, and they do it one of two ways. They either heat it from the outside, and it sort of steams. It would be like boiled oil, or they burn it, which is where you heat the oil to about 550 degrees and it ignites. And it as it burns, it gets heavier and heavier. Like if it burns for maybe 1 hour, it's like maybe a 5/0. Or if it burns for 24, it's like body gum, you know. Then you extinguish the fire, and that's how the oil's bodied. The interesting thing about oils is, say you had an ink where you had a number 1 and a number 5 oil. Say you used them 50-50. You know, somebody might say, well, you could just take a number 3 and in the same place, but you can't. The dimensions are real interesting. You know, get what I'm saying? Like a 1 and a 5 combination is entirely different than a 3, even though a 3 is midway between. Mm-hmm. You know, so balancing the oils is sort of where it's at.
When you make a litho ink, you'd be using varnish instead of oil?
Well, the words are interchangeable.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, put it this way. I use burnt oils in my Intaglio ink because burnt oils are the most expensive and they wipe the best. They're less sticky. Mm-hmm. I think the reason for that, though I'm not sure, is that when the linseed oil is burning, it's burning off a lot of the grease. Okay, when you boil an oil, you know, a heat-bodied oil that isn't burned, you aren't burning off the grease. So one thing that's advantageous in litho ink is not advantageous in the Intaglio ink. Okay.
You want your litho ink to be greasy.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah. Just the opposite of what you want here.
Okay. I always thought that from litho varnish that you're really talking about a different compound than any oil.
Litho, like if you ever look in a graphic chemical catalog, you'll see that the exact same prices for their litho varnish and for their
plate
oils, exact same, and I'm sure it's the same, comes out of the same drum. And you know, it's the same creature. In other words, burnt oil in Intaglio ink makes excellent litho ink, but oil for litho ink that hasn't been burnt doesn't make good Intaglio ink. It's all how it's bodied. You know? But see, commercially, nobody's using that much linseed oil in the ink trade anyway. I mean, they are, but everybody's really getting into the resin base and the alkyd base and all that sort of space age stuff that's more water resistant.
Mm-hmm. But let me make sure I understand. Your litho blacks are not based on the plate oil. They're based on linseed oil.
Based on they're all based on linseed oil. That's where it all comes from.
Okay,
but
it's all linseed oil, but one is burnt.
One is burnt, and the other's just bodied by heat, which is different.
Bodied by heat. Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's starting to get a little bit warm.
Warm?
Yeah, you can feel just a trace. An ink this heavy, about the only way it can be made is on a 3-roll mill. I don't think you can make an ink that heavy on a disperser. A disperser's like a mix master that goes several thousand RPM, you know, per minute, and it's got this like blade on the bottom of it, like a bucksaw blade with sort of twisted teeth. And this thing just whirls like hell, and it keeps pulling this stuff down into it, this dispersion. And the pigment is moving so fast that it actually shears these agglomerates apart. It does what those rollers do. And in my mind, I just don't think that could be all that good. But God, you could turn out so much ink on one of those things. Just fill up this thing and probably run it for 10 minutes and just start pouring out, you know. I think that's the way most Intaglio ink is made.
In the big companies?
Yeah, I think. I don't want to say that for sure. I got a hunch that's the way it's made. I've been told that a couple of times that, you know, that's the way they're doing it. And then there's also other ways of grinding pigment too. There's like ball mills and shot mills. Ball mills are just big drums with ball bearings in them, and you throw it, like they use that for paint making. Mm-hmm. They'll throw all the stuff in and they'll turn it on for 24 hours and they'll come back and everything is all, you know, all done.
So when now your relief inks are going.
Should we shut this off, or should we keep going?
Whatever you do.
Okay. I want to know.
You might as well get your job done.
Yeah. Okay. On relief inks, what?
Yeah, when you make a relief ink now, are you going to use linseed oil for relief inks?
Yeah. Relief inks are, in a sense, the easiest. I mean, since you don't have any, you don't have to worry about water films, and you don't have to worry about wiping it off the plate. All you have to do is get a balance where you don't pick the paper and you, and it comes clean from the matrix. You know, prints clean. One of my most favorite pigments is lamp black. I love lamp black. It's the basis of like flat black paint, and it has a real dull, lustrous surface that I think is beautiful, and that's what I put in my relief ink. There's different grades. There's like real cheap grades, but the grade I use is real expensive. It's most expensive lamp black I've ever seen. It's just incredibly beautiful pigment. And you know, it prints really quite a bit different than a carbon black, but it's also not very durable. The surface is real frail. Commercially, like in litho ink and relief ink, they put wax compounds that rise to the surface of the ink and makes it much more durable to the hand. One of the big claims is how scuff resistant somebody's ink is. You know,
yeah,
it's like this real tough creature they're making, and that doesn't pertain to what we're doing. You know, I mean, it's just not a part of it. Another thing they talk about commercially is how much gloss their ink has got. Everybody's real into having glossy ink, and the burnt oils don't make very glossy ink. I hate glossy ink, you know, unless that's what I want. But I don't like glossy ink. Glossy, you know, turns me off. So there again, that's another difference between what printmakers are doing and everybody else.
Is that the fourth time?
Yeah, that's fourth.
I think we'll probably hold the tape. You go ahead and make your ink, and we'll hold the tape.
And I didn't want to do what I had to do, probably to make money off my prints. Plus, I'm not convinced I could do what I had to do to make the money anyway. And I work for an offset printer, and though it's a pretty good job and all that kind of stuff, I still don't like it. And so I wanted to work for myself. No, I don't. My art suffers. There's no question about it. For the last year, my art has suffered. I've been trying to find ways to make the stuff without having to go through all the tedium of editioning it. I mean, I've been playing around with hiring people to print it and stuff like that, which is probably what I ultimately decide to do. I'm undercapitalized, so I just have to keep doing things the way I did. If I had $20,000 in the bank, I could quit my job, and by the time the money ran out, the ink thing would support me and all that. But I'm in debt. I mean, I'm way in debt. I'm in debt as far as I can go with this house and all that junk, you know, because I borrow against the house. But as the business grows, the bank loans me more money, and as they loan me more money, the more potential money I can make. I'm real interested in how business works. I'm real interested in trying to find some way to plug into society that doesn't cost me a fortune emotionally, and yet I still feel attached somehow.
Don't you have some sense about, I mean, when you first started getting the ink, you knew that it was going to be a year and a half or two?
Well, I'm told 5.
5 years?
Yeah. I'm told that between 4 and 5 is when things start to break.
So how many hours a week can you work on your art? Or do you have to measure it in a month?
Well, I sure as I can't work on it 3 days a week or anything like that. I can work on it in, like, maybe I'll spend 3 hours one day, 1 hour the next day, then maybe I can spend a Saturday, you know? But what suffers is the additioning. I don't addition much stuff, yeah. So I knock out 4 or 5 proofs and I like them, and you know how that is. If you wait 4 or 5 months, you can't remember how you made them. Even if you write everything down, something's still, you have to redo it, you know? So I suspect that at some point in the future, I'm going to have to just, you know, addition this stuff. But I'm in a bind right now, I mean, in terms of time. But that's you know, that's the only way out, is just to keep going forward. You know, sooner or later things will let up a little bit. It's sort of a weird thing. If I don't push the business right now and make art, then the business sort of lags. And the sooner I can get the business thing going, the sooner I can quit my job or go on part-time. And then, you know, part-time seems like I'll be doing that probably in 4 months.
You're on a 40-hour week now?
Well, more or less. I work about 35. It's a fairly lax place. But see, I'm still subsidizing the business with my job. I still pay for stuff for the business out of my own personal money. Well, I can't be seeing that too much longer. That's that's foolish.
Like a lot of this stuff, like that big cactus there, that big litho. That's a litho, isn't it?
Yeah, that's just a one color. That's a multicolored print.
That's just one of the
Yeah, that's just the key plate, and there's a bunch of junk that pops in behind it and over the top of it. I'm going to have a show this spring, and maybe a couple I'm hoping for. And so I got to get stuff together for that. You know, I've got like 8 years of work, and that's enough for a show, no problem. But you know, I'd like to have enough for a show that I'd produced in 1 year.
Show in Seattle?
I'm going to have one at Western, and I'm hoping to have one in Seattle somewhere, I don't know where. And I'm hoping to get a few connections here and there and try to, like, maybe talk to Strunk or Ash or somebody and try to get, you know, just sort of get it in a crate and get it moving. I have different ideas about prints than some people have, I know that. You know, I mean, I think that hand-colored prints are beautiful. And it's only been in the last 2 or 3 years that anybody saw hand-colored prints were okay.
Yeah. Another trend, too, is a one-of-a-kind, the edition variable, which is really coming into its own, and they're starting to look at the monoprint anew. I see that trend happening. A lot less emphasis on the editioned identical multiple in the last year and a half, 2 years.
I think things are just a lot looser all the way around, and I really welcome that. I think that historically prints up to, I'd say up through the 60s, and probably somewhat still, have been based around commercial print mediums. And you know, they still are, in the sense we get all our materials and our technology and stuff from, you know, remnant print mediums, you know, commercial mediums. But you know, sort of the historical link and everything was connected to, you know, lithostones and transfer presses and copper plate engraving presses and all that kind of stuff. And I think that the object was made from that same perspective. I mean, it was accepted. You know, you read Carl Ziegrosser, and I mean, he's talking like, you know, 19th century, around a lot of this stuff. You know, I mean, it doesn't just deal with sheer beauty. It deals with nomenclature and structure and all this sort of stuff. And you know, there's like exceptions that I'm like, if you look at Carol Summers, he's sort of an exception of someone who's sort of outside of all that stuff. And I think economically he's probably real successful. And I'm real interested in economics. I mean, I'm interested in making money at what I do, because I think people should be paid, and I think that the greatest compliment is for someone to give you money for your art. You know,
money means participation.
Right. I mean, you know, how many people have come to you and said, "Boy, I really like your art," and that's as far as it goes. You know, I mean, you know, you could say, "God, for $75 you could own that thing." You know, $75 is a night out, the movies and dinner. You know, you could own that thing. You could own it forever. It wouldn't be like, you know, movie and dinner, you know. But I don't see that changing very much. The same people collect and the same people do the same stuff. And don't think I'm mad at anybody about that. I don't know how to make art be a bigger part of the world, and at least in this culture. I don't know. There's a confusion for me. Well, my feeling is that no matter what, as you get older and you keep making stuff, your work, and it takes on a certain quality as you get older. I don't know, not necessarily better, but something. And I think that, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, I mean, we're all going to have careers. It's just a matter of how long we wait it out, Like Edward Callahan had that show, and he sold $40,000, $50,000 worth of art, which sounds like a lot of money. But the gallery gets probably like, 40, they probably get 40%, so he probably goes away with like maybe 25 grand. The guy's 70 years old, he's been working all his life. But I guess if you think of your art in terms of money, it gets weird. That's the reason that I try to keep my art separate from that ink thing. Like I don't want people to necessarily know that I make art, because I'm uncomfortable about my money and my personal life being too closely connected. You know what I mean? That's something I have trouble with. Like where I work, I don't sit around and tell them about the latest print I'm making. There's a couple of people that know me real well and we're good friends.
Go in a corner and talk about it.
There's something about that I'm not comfortable with, and I don't know why that is. Why I'm not comfortable with the money thing in art. I mean, I'm not comfortable being an artist in this culture, because I don't think this culture takes artists that seriously. I mean, I'm not that comfortable. It's okay where I'm at, but I don't, if I was a brain surgeon, you go to a party and everybody want to sit around and drink with you,
Hi, I'm Bill Ritchie. I went to visit the Olympus Press on Bainbridge Island, together with Greg Both and Lorna Pauley, and our video equipment. We went to see Daniel Smith doing some work on his silkscreen print, which was in progress at that time. At Olympus, they had already printed a number of colors, made trial proofs, and had prints for Dan to look over. He made some comments, and together with Michael Cobb, he considered what changes he might make. He talked about the colors that were possible, including some which contained metallic flake. Olympus Press has been in operation for a number of years, specializing in hand-printed artworks in editions of relatively small quantities, averaging 200 in each. They exist in a world between the world of high-speed, mass-produced reproductions, where runs in the tens of thousands are common, and the world of the printmaker, where the designer, plate maker, and printer may be one person, and in this latter instance, editions of 10 to 100 prints are considered common.
You don't contact directly with this thing I just drew right here? Well,
Daniel Smith himself knows both of these worlds, being a journeyman lithographer and having an art school background. He has been a visiting artist at Cornish School of Allied Arts and the University of Washington in Seattle, and also at Texas University in Wichita Falls and at Kalamazoo, Michigan. One of the innovations Dan Smith is bringing to Olympus is the tinting of the inks with his own preferred palette of lithograph colors. He and the Olympus staff found that they can easily add these hues to the screen printing inks for colors which would not otherwise be easily obtained in screen print inks alone. While Dan is in the art studio making notations about color, we took the camera into the printing area to record Rick Scott, who's a press operator there, and Percy Henderson, as they were making a few trial proofs on another screen print. Rick and Percy are trying to see how the new stencil will register with the previous colors, and how the particular white ink they're going to use will work out. These mechanically operated screen printing presses are necessary for most of Olympus' work. They do have some hand-operated systems, but for the repetitious work of trial proofing, testing, registering, and of course running the final edition, they need a machine. The work would undoubtedly wear out any person before the job could be completed. Olympus Press is equipped to produce very large prints. There they have found effective images could result from combining screen prints with embossed surfaces. And in order to do this, they have installed etching facilities and Intaglio presses. They use the screen print medium to apply acid resist to copper plates, after which they etch the plates to produce the textures. There are other parts of Olympus Press, such as the photo darkroom, where the artist's hand-drawn transparencies are applied to the photo silk screen. But the video camera could not record in the dark room. Greg and Lorna and I certainly enjoyed our visit to the Olympus Press, and we hope someday to record a complete tour of the facility.